So it makes a lot of sense to people that you would think a lot about storytelling if you were writing fiction. And some of you are, but most of the people in this course are writing nonfiction. But storytelling is just as important for nonfiction writers. And a book with no stories is hard to read, and we're really designed by God in a lot of ways to respond to stories. Jesus taught in stories, in his parables. The whole Bible is a big story made up of stories. So storytelling, how to do it, why to do it, is really important to think about. I I gave a sermon on Sunday at our church, and I wanted to illustrate something, so I told a story. I told about when I was 19 years old, I went into the military, and I was not happy to be stationed so far away from home in Delaware. I'm from Texas originally, and my job was kind of terrible. The work hours were kind of terrible. I did not really connect with anybody I worked with at first. It was just a lot of people that were just not like the people I was used to being with, or people that I could relate to. I missed I missed home really bad. I even had a girlfriend back home that was cheating on me. I mean, just everything about existence in the moment was just horrible. But my family was coming to New York City for Christmas. So I had some leave, and I got to go to New York City from Dover, which was a 3 hour train ride. Um, and spend a week with them, with my dad paying for everything and my parents giving me presents and money, and we just did all kinds of things. It was so fun. But then I had to leave a day before everybody else. And I had just got to this moment where I'd used up all my leave for the year. I'd spent all my money. I'm sitting in the train station in Wilmington, Delaware, waiting for the shuttle to take me down to Dover. And I want to go buy a pack of gum, and I had 75 cents in my pocket. The gum cost 75 cents, and I couldn't afford the tax. So I had to put the gum back. And I just sat there feeling so dejected and sorry for myself. I was not a Christian yet, so I didn't really have hope out of this world. And everything that I could see in this world right now was bad. And when you're young like that, you still 4 years, I'm stuck for 4 years in the Air Force, and I'm thinking that sounds like eternity. And I'm getting ready to go back to the base. My roommate was kind of dirty. I always call him the porn king because he had pornography all over the room. He didn't shower. I mean, it was like it was everything about my existence to me at the time was as bad as it could be. So I told that story to illustrate a feeling, because we were, hey Roger,
Yeah.
because because we were talking about spiritual dejection from Isaiah 61 and 62, and God giving them hope, and giving them hope for a new name, hope for just a whole new existence, while the Israelites were at their worst place in exile. And when I thought about a story to illustrate the feeling of it, that's what I came up with. It wasn't the perfect story, because the perfect story would have illustrated it perfectly and would have been completely alignable to it. I would have been a Christian already, maybe, but in exile or something like that. So, it felt like a little bit of a risk. But the point of storytelling, 9 times out of 10, is the emotion. Because we've talked about, whenever you're writing something, you want to think about what to know, what to do, but you also want to think about what to feel. My wife was listening last night to the old classic Think and Grow Rich. We've been seeing a lot of advertisements for this new movie that has come out about Think and Grow Rich, the old classic self-help book. And he's talking about um, you could repeat an affirmation 1,000 times a day, and it's meaningless if you don't get emotionally connected to it. She was I was falling asleep and I heard him saying that, and I remembered reading that. I read that book like 20 years ago. I'm not even endorsing it now as a Christian. I'm not sure. I haven't gone back and revisited it in a while, but that made sense to me. There's something so powerful about getting emotionally engaged. So if you don't write stories, it's very hard to emotionally engage a reader. Anytime, most preaching instruction will tell you should tell stories. And I've said this before, I've mentioned this before, that the the temptation when you really are new at it is to tell a story that's not super relevant. That you've there's a word that kind of relates to a story, and so you tell a story just to tell a story, and it's interesting, but it doesn't really make the point that you're trying to make. It doesn't really connect to the point. If the listener or the reader is thinking very much about what you're saying, they're going to be wondering, what does that have to do with anything? And so often, as preachers, new preachers are just afraid of being boring. They're afraid of, not having anything to say. And so they just put in a story. Or writers will do the same thing. So you really got to be ruthless about what is the point of the story you're telling. What's the purpose of it? And so when you think of a story that's going to illustrate the point that you're making, you want to ask, does it align with the central theme? Does it align with the spiritual truth of your book? Does it help the reader understand the key point? I don't remember who it was. Maybe it's a lot of different. Maybe I've heard this from multiple writers and speakers. They'll tell a story about their mother always cutting the end off of a ham when they put it in the oven. Have you guys ever heard this story? I think it was Zig Ziglar the first time I heard this. But he said his mother would always cut the end off the ham when she would cook it. And he asked her, why do you do that? She goes, I don't know. My mother always did it. And so he asked her mother, well, why did you always cut the end off the ham when you put it in the oven? You go down the line far enough and you find out the original person to do that was the one who had a small oven, and they couldn't fit a whole ham in the oven, so they always cut the end off the ham and put it in. Well, the next person learned that, got a bigger oven, and never knew why they did it. Well, that's a good story. It's more of an anecdote, but it's still a good story because it illustrates something, and that in a way you'll never forget. Like when traditions are passed down, sometimes we just do things because we were taught to do them. We never ask why we did it. So that's a good kind of story, but it's an even better story if it actually happened to you. So you can kind of think of this as a checklist. So does the story have a purpose? Does this actually illustrate a purpose? And then does it have a hook? Does your story actually grab attention in the first sentence or two? Does it evoke curiosity or emotion right away? Who's the central figure in the story? Is it you? Is it somebody else? Is it a biblical character? Is it clear what their motivations and emotions and struggles are? So that ham story is more of an anecdote, but if it's going to be a real story, there's going to be some conflict in it, maybe some tension, some struggle, some challenge. You know, my story in the train station, there's emotion there. I just felt so low, and it was kind of encapsulated by that. I couldn't even buy gum. Is there an obstacle or a question that needs resolution? Is there a beginning, a middle, and an end? Sometimes an anecdote won't have a beginning, middle, and an end, but a story will. Is there a resolution to the story? Sometimes you'll see people start a story and they don't finish it. And then the other thing you want to ask yourself is, where should I put the resolution? Sometimes you want to put the resolution right away and then just say, this is what the story illustrates. Other times I want to tell a story and I want to leave it open-ended for a while because the conflict of the story is the point I'm trying to make. And I'm presenting it as a pain point or I'm presenting it as a problem to be solved, but I don't want to give away the ending yet. You know, I want to spend a good amount of time talking about the problem itself. And so the resolution is going to come. Well, here's how this ended up. Does the transformation, the lesson, the insight, does it point back to your topic, either the big topic or the topic you're trying to make in that chapter? Does it align with the truth, the Bible? Also, is it relatable? Are all your stories about how amazing you are, or or do your stories help the reader identify and relate to you? Are you able to tell stories about your failures, your weaknesses? Who's the hero of your story? Is it you or is it God? Then how are you doing it connecting it back to the point and connecting it back to the reader? Again, like to bring up the idea of a sermon, when I've noticed a lot of young preachers when they're preaching through a text, they're pretty good at reading the text, explaining the text, but they will then not point back to the text to say to remind the listener how what I just said came from the text. And so a story, you can get so lost in writing it that you forget to tie it back. You kind of tell the story and then you move on as though the reader is going to understand exactly why you told that story. Don't be afraid to be a little over obvious um, at that point because you can actually lose the reader and they don't even know it. Why does that matter if they don't know it? It matters because you're actually trying to get transformation. You're actually trying to get them to remember later, not just the story, but what the point of the story was for the transformation that you're trying to help them to make. But constantly, the way you're telling it, is it is it helping you with the what to feel piece? You know, and again, we talked last week a little bit about how we don't want to, or 2 weeks ago we were talking about we don't want to be unethical. We don't want to manipulate people. We just want the emotion that they should feel to be the emotion that they do feel. You're writing about their sin, they should feel sorrowful. At some point in the process, they maybe should feel ashamed if they're to the point where they're just now being able to come to grips with the fact that they've sinned against God and others, but they have not yet opened their heart to receive forgiveness. At some point, you may want them to be like Isaiah in chapter 6, where he sees God on the throne and he wants to die. He knows he thinks he's going to die because he understands all of a sudden he was just shown the difference between himself and God. Woe is me. I am a man of unclean lips. I come from a people of unclean lips. I'm a dead man. And the relief comes immediately when the seraphim brings the coal over and burns his lips and says, now you're clean. Who's going to go for me to the nations? And he says, send me. What a great story. What a great story. I mean, you don't see the prophets don't do that often, but Isaiah tells us about this commission that he had, and you just can feel it. Goes into the room, and it's this thunderous shaking and smoke and these massive monsters, the seraphim, and they're singing at the top of their lungs, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. And all he can think as one who is not yet cleansed by the blood of Jesus, I'm a dead man. And that's a story, and that's a personal story of Isaiah. Um, you know, Stories of hope, the stories of gospel transformation. Tim Keller tells a story about someone who I think he goes and pays for a prostitute, and then he like just loves her and cares for her and doesn't sleep with her and treats her like she's special, and then she can't go and be a prostitute anymore because of the way this person treated her. And he uses that as an illustration of what it means to receive the grace of God, and then and have God's grace, have the gospel change us, not just save us, but change us. That's a good story. Um, what's harder for me is this one, the practical details. Is the story concise enough? Easier to do in writing than preaching, because in preaching you can kind of go off, but in writing you can do it because you can edit and edit and edit. But do you have like all the right amount of words to be concise and make the point? Um, Usually when I'm writing fiction, in the editing process, I have to get rid of two-thirds of the adjectives because I've been a little bit too wordy, did too much telling and not enough showing. And then just a practical thing, do you have permission to share the story? If it's somebody else's story, you should get permission. Not necessarily from a legal aspect, but I just think when it's somebody, Jody was talking about this the other couple weeks ago about trying to figure out, is it okay for me to share the story of somebody if it's not my story? And sometimes it just depends on, are you going to name them? A lot of times in my ghostwriting, when I have to come up with content, there's probably a lot of books out there about my friend, the opera singer, because I'll include a story about myself, the friend of the author, because it's not the same story necessarily, but do you have permission to use it?